The corridors of Franklin High hummed with their usual morning chaos. Lockers slammed like drums, sneakers squeaked against the tiled floors, and the overlapping chatter of hundreds of teenagers swirled in the air like a storm. For most teachers, it was just background noise, but for Miss Evans, it was a wall of sound pressing in from every side. She walked carefully, shoulders slightly hunched, as though trying to shrink into her cream-colored dress. In her hands, she clutched a neat stack of lesson plans, perfectly aligned, corners squared, as if the papers could anchor her trembling nerves. It was her first week in this new school, her first real teaching job, and she still felt like an imposter every time she stepped inside. She had rehearsed everything. How to smile warmly at students without seeming too soft, how to stand with authority without looking stiff, even how to raise her voice just enough so her words carried but didn't crack. And yet, every morning, her stomach knotted the moment she pushed open the glass doors and walked into the buzzing hive of teenagers. Today, the knot pulled tighter than usual. She had just turned the corner near the science wing when it happened. A cluster of boys leaned against the lockers, their laughter too loud, too sharp. They weren't laughing at anything in particular. Miss Evans had already learned that bullies often laughed just to show they could, but the moment their eyes caught her, the laughter shifted. It sharpened, like glass underfoot. "There she is," one of them muttered, not bothering to lower his voice. "The new mouse." Miss Evans stiffened. She kept her eyes forward, focusing on the classroom door at the far end of the hallway. "Just make it to the door," she told herself. "Don't give them what they want." But footsteps shuffled behind her, faster now, closing in. "Hey, teach," another voice jeered, this one dripping with mockery. "Nice dress. My grandma's curtains look just like that." The others howled with laughter, and Miss Evans' cheeks burned. She tightened her grip on the lesson plans. The papers crinkled slightly, but she didn't dare loosen her hold. If she stopped, if she turned, if she showed one flicker of fear, it would only fuel them. But the boys weren't satisfied with silence. They moved closer, circling. One darted forward, a quick hand tugging at her sleeve. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue?" Miss Evans took a breath, steady and controlled. She had spent years learning how to control her body, how to center herself in the dojo where she trained. But here, in this fluorescent-lit hallway, surrounded by jeering teenagers, those lessons felt far away, like a dream she wasn't sure belonged to her anymore. Then came the sound she couldn't ignore, the sharp, humiliating rip of fabric. One of the boys had grabbed the hem of her dress and yanked. The soft material tore easily, the sound magnified in her ears until it drowned out everything else. For a heartbeat, she froze. Her breath caught in her throat, her vision tunneled, and all she could feel was the sting of humiliation. Around her, laughter erupted, loud and merciless. Students who hadn't even been part of it now slowed, turned, and stared. Some whispered, others snickered, and all of it pressed down on her like a crushing wave. Her mind scrambled for a way out. She could run, duck into the nearest classroom, lock the door, and pretend it hadn't happened. She could try to scold them, though her voice would almost certainly falter. Or she could just stand there, rooted in place, waiting for it to end. But beneath the panic, another feeling stirred. It was small at first, buried deep, but it grew with every second of laughter that cut at her dignity. Anger. Not the loud, explosive kind she had seen in others, but a quiet, burning anger that lived in her chest like a coal. It reminded her of every time she had been underestimated, every time someone had mistaken her quiet nature for weakness. The hallway noise faded into the background. She could hear her own heartbeat now, steady, controlled. Her posture shifted almost imperceptibly, her shoulders straightening, her weight settling on the balls of her feet. The stack of lesson plans in her hands no longer felt like a shield. They felt like a burden she was about to set down. The bullies didn't notice the change. They were too busy basking in the attention of the crowd, slapping each other on the back, grinning like hyenas circling prey. But Miss Evans noticed. Inside, she felt something old and familiar waking up. The discipline, the balance, the strength she had once trained to perfection. And for the first time since stepping foot into Franklin High, the knot in her stomach loosened, replaced by something sharper, steadier. The rip of her dress wasn't the end of her first week. It was the beginning of something none of them would forget. The boys were still laughing when Miss Evans' lesson plans slipped from her hands and fluttered to the floor like white birds scattered by a storm. A few pages skidded across the polished tiles, but she didn't even glance at them. Her eyes had sharpened, her breathing slowed, and her body seemed to shift into a stance that didn't belong to the shy, nervous teacher they thought they were tormenting. One of the boys leaned closer, smirking. "What's wrong, miss? Don't cry now. We were just..." He didn't get to finish. With a movement so fast it was almost a blur, Miss Evans turned her shoulder and redirected the hand he'd stretched toward her arm. The boy stumbled, surprised, and the laughter faltered for the first time. She hadn't struck him, at least not yet. She had simply moved with a precision and confidence none of them expected. The corridor suddenly felt different. The air tightened. The crowd of students, who had been giggling and pointing, now leaned forward, sensing something about to happen, the way animals sense a storm rolling in. Another boy, taller, heavier, decided to restore the joke. "Oh, come on, guys. She's just a scared little teacher. Watch this." He swaggered forward, pushing his chest out, ready to make her flinch. But Miss Evans didn't step back. Her gaze locked on him, steady and unflinching, and before he could lay a finger on her, her hand sliced upward in a controlled, lightning-quick motion. The sharp edge of her palm met the strap of his backpack with a crack. The force knocked the heavy bag sideways, jerking the boy off balance. He stumbled 2 steps back, crashing into a locker with a clang that echoed through the hallway. Gasps erupted from the watching students, their laughter transforming into wide-eyed silence. Miss Evans didn't chase him. She didn't shout. She simply returned to her stance, her feet planted, her shoulders relaxed, as if this were a drill she had performed 1,000 times before. The years of training came back to her effortlessly, the stances, the strikes, the calm breathing. She remembered nights in the dojo, the sting of her instructor's corrections, the rhythm of repetition until her body no longer hesitated. All of it lived in her bones, and now, for the first time outside the padded mats, she needed it. The bullies exchanged looks, their smirks cracking into disbelief. They weren't used to resistance, not from a teacher, and certainly not from someone as quiet as Miss Evans. "You think you're tough," another muttered, his voice shaky, though he tried to mask it with bravado. He lunged at her, reaching to grab her shoulder. This time, Miss Evans didn't wait. She pivoted, smoothly, her elbow snapping up in a controlled arc that stopped just inches from his face, close enough for him to feel the rush of air. She didn't hit him, but the precision of the movement, the speed, the unshakable confidence in her posture made him recoil as though she had. The crowd erupted in whispers. "Did you see that? She almost... Whoa, she's like a ninja or something." The bullies faltered. Their earlier bravado melted into uncertainty. They weren't laughing anymore. Some tried to brush it off, forcing chuckles, but their eyes betrayed them. For the first time, they weren't in control of the scene. Miss Evans was. Her voice, when it came, was calm. Not loud, not trembling, just calm. "That's enough." It was astonishing how quickly the words cut through the noise. Students who moments earlier had been buzzing with excitement quieted down, drawn into the authority laced in her tone. The boys shuffled, suddenly unsure of themselves, while the taller one rubbed his shoulder where her strike had shifted his backpack. For Miss Evans, everything felt strangely still. The adrenaline coursed through her veins, yes, but it wasn't panic. It was clarity. Every lesson from her martial arts training echoed in her mind. Use only the strength you need. Protect. Don't punish. Stand your ground with calmness, not anger. She wasn't here to hurt them. She was here to stop them, to show them, and everyone watching, that her silence was not weakness. The hallway, moments ago a theater of mockery, had transformed into something else entirely. Students who had never noticed her before now stared in awe. A freshman whispered to his friend, "She just took him out with one move." A senior, usually too cool to react to anything, let out a low whistle. Miss Evans bent down slowly, never breaking eye contact with the bullies, and gathered her scattered lesson plans. Her hands were steady now. When she straightened, she held herself taller, no longer hunched or hesitant. She looked at each of the boys in turn, not with anger, but with a calm, piercing confidence that made them shift uncomfortably under her gaze. The power in the hallway had shifted, and everyone felt it. The bullies who had torn her dress expecting tears and humiliation were left gaping, while the quiet teacher they thought they could break stood unshaken. The fight wasn't physical anymore. She had already won. The silence after Miss Evans' final words was heavier than any noise that had filled the hallway before. Students stood frozen, still processing what they had witnessed, their faces glowing with disbelief and awe. A few dared to whisper, their voices hushed, as if they were afraid to disturb the moment. Did that really just happen? Did she really do that? The bullies, who only moments ago strutted with confidence, now looked cornered and exposed. The ringleader, the tall boy with the backpack, shifted his weight from foot to foot, rubbing the strap mark across his shoulder. His smirk had vanished. Another, the one who had tugged her dress, bent to adjust his shoelaces, trying to look casual, though his ears burned red. They avoided her eyes, and when they dared glance up, they were met with a calm, steady gaze that seemed to see right through their bravado. Miss Evans exhaled slowly, letting the tension flow out of her body the way she had been taught in training. She could feel her heartbeat slowing, her breath returning to normal. The coal of anger that had sparked earlier cooled into something steadier, resolve. Her lesson plans were once again stacked neatly in her hands, though a corner was bent and a page slightly torn. She smoothed them out with care, as though nothing extraordinary had just happened. Then she spoke, her voice quiet but firm, carrying down the length of the hallway. This ends now. Do you understand? It wasn't a shout, it wasn't a threat, but the authority in her tone left no room for argument. The boys nodded almost instinctively, the bravado that had shielded them gone. For the first time, they looked less like predators and more like children caught in a lie. And then came the applause. It started softly, a single pair of hands clapping near the lockers. Heads turned toward the source, a sophomore girl grinning from ear to ear. Then another joined, and another, until the entire hallway erupted into cheers, claps, and whistles. Some students raised their arms as if they were in a stadium. "Go, Miss Evans," one shouted. Another, laughing in disbelief, yelled, "Best teacher ever." Miss Evans felt heat rise to her cheeks. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, especially not like this. She wanted to disappear into her classroom and close the door, but at the same time, a spark of pride flickered inside her chest. This wasn't the humiliation the bullies had intended. It was a moment of triumph. The bullies, red-faced and humiliated in a way they had never been before, slunk toward the exit of the hallway. Their footsteps were awkward and hurried, a retreat disguised as nonchalance. One muttered something under his breath, but even his own friends didn't laugh. Their reign over the hallway had ended, undone in the span of seconds by the teacher they had thought was the easiest target. Miss Evans straightened her posture. For once, she didn't shrink under the eyes watching her. She lifted her chin, adjusted the torn hem of her dress with one hand, and gathered herself with the composure of someone who had just stepped out of the shadows into the light. She looked at the students, dozens of them now watching with shining eyes, buzzing with admiration, and offered a small, almost shy smile. "Class starts in 5 minutes, she said evenly, her voice cutting through the cheers. The command wasn't barked, it was spoken with such calm certainty that students began moving automatically, filing toward their classrooms without complaint. The energy had shifted entirely. What had been a stage for her humiliation was now her arena of respect. As the hallway cleared, a few students lingered, whispering and glancing back at her as though they were seeing her for the first time. She caught snippets of their voices. "She's amazing. I didn't know she could do that. She's like a superhero." Their admiration filled the space like sunlight after a storm. When the last of them disappeared into their classrooms, Miss Evans finally allowed herself to breathe deeply. She bent down, smoothed the last page of her lesson plans, and glanced at the rip in her dress. The damage was visible, but strangely, it no longer mattered. That rip had been the spark for everything that followed. It was no longer a mark of shame but a reminder of the strength she had carried with her all along. For the rest of the day, whispers followed her through the school, not the cruel ones from before, but whispers of respect. Students peeked into her classroom, eager to glimpse the teacher who had stood up not just for herself, but, in a way, for them all. Her legend was already spreading, and though she felt a flush of embarrassment every time someone grinned at her in the halls, she also felt something new, something she hadn't carried into Franklin High before. belonging. By the final bell, Miss Evans realized something important. She didn't have to pretend anymore. She didn't have to force smiles or practice authority in the mirror. She only had to stand in her own truth, quiet, strong, unshakable. And from that day forward, no one at Franklin High thought of her as the shy new teacher again. She was Miss Evans, the one who had turned humiliation into victory with nothing but a calm gaze, a steady hand, and a single karate chop that the school would be talking about for years to come.